Okay, so let's talk a little bit on the legality side. Can you afford a housekeeper? How the heck do you have good communication with somebody that does not speak English if it's customary for housekeepers to do that, or maybe it's considered an upcharge? I tend not to trust agencies. There are very few exceptions. That's your opportunity to get to know them. First of all, have you noticed how few videos there are on how to hire a housekeeper in Mexico? This is crazy because most people have never had a housekeeper of any kind. And then one of the perks, one of the benefits, the best part possibly of living in Mexico is the affordability of help, specifically housekeepers. So in the US, I've had 3 housekeepers as well as a cleaning service, not at the same time, spread apart. And so coming to Mexico, knowing that it was affordable, obviously, one of the things that was pretty high on my list of things that I wanted was a part-time housekeeper. But just because I wanted it didn't necessarily mean that I'm ready for it. So here are the things that will help you get ready to hire a housekeeper if that's something you want to do in Mexico. Okay, so the first step obviously is just knowing what you want and what you need. So things to consider. Can you afford a housekeeper? So obviously the daily rates for a housekeeper changes widely, and I say daily rates because it is the custom to pay a housekeeper per day as opposed to how many hours it takes to clean the home. Now, this ranges on the size of your home, on exactly what you want the housekeeper to do. Some people want all the works, some people just want to keep things minimal. But generally speaking, in San Cris, I am told between 250 and 400 pesos a day is considered normal as a daily rate for a housekeeper. And so you might want a housekeeper to come every day, but can you afford that, and do you really need or want it? Tying in with the can you afford it concept is you need to understand a little bit of the customs when it comes to paying. And so things you need to know is once you commit to having a housekeeper come weekly, you're committed. Whether you're there that week or not, whether you need her that week or not, she needs to get paid unless you intend to terminate the relationship. So if you have an agreement that somebody's gonna come every Monday to clean your home, let's say that next week you're planning on going out of town, you've got a trip planned, etc. You have a choice of either trusting that person to come to your home and clean it while you're not there, leaving money on the countertop or something so they still get paid that day. Or if you know for sure that you don't need help next week, then this week is a great time to pay her for 2 weeks because you want to make sure her income stays the same every week and doesn't fluctuate so much just because you decided to have a day off. Other things to consider is if you're going to stay in the area for a very short period of time, they're going to need to know that it's only a 1-month gig. On the flip side, if you think you're going to be staying a long time and building a longer relationship in terms of budget, you want to make sure that you understand there should be a pay increase every year as well as a Christmas pay, and there's actual math around how much it should be. And the longer you stay, things like severance pay, medical benefits, etc., should be considered. We'll talk more about money in a minute. Okay, so now that you have a basic idea of the budget requirement, what else is it that you want? How often do you want the housekeeper to come? How long do you want the housekeeper to stay? What specifically do you want done in the home? So not only do different expats have different expectations for what they want in terms of cleaning their home, but you'll find that the locals have their own definition of what a housekeeper is. And so if you know ahead of time what you want, you'll probably have a better chance of explaining it and therefore getting the thing that you want. For example, my sister and I are basically polar opposite when it comes to hiring housekeepers. I am extraordinarily lazy. I hate cleaning, I hate washing dishes, I hate sweeping the floor, all the things. And so for me, it is super important that my housekeeper understands that that's my expectation. I want them to do really the things they probably do in their own home on a daily basis. So it's making sure the kitchen, the bathroom, and the floors are clean. I care a lot less about high dusting, baseboards, etc. Whereas my sister kind of enjoys cleaning the house, keeping everything tidy and organized and pretty. She also enjoys having her kids help around the house. And so when she hires a cleaner, she wants the deep clean. She wants all the things she doesn't normally have time to get to. Listen, I don't want you in my house for 6 hours a day. I would much rather you focus on kind of the normal things that I just don't want to do. And last but not least, what are your personality requirements? So for me, I need somebody who is a good communicator and somebody I can trust. Now, the trust factor really relies on my gut instincts, on my perception, and it does also take time to figure out. For those of you who are like myself, you're not fluent in Spanish and you're wondering, well, how the heck do you have good communication with somebody that does not speak English? while obviously we should always be attempting to learn more and more Spanish, I think what's kind of more important than fully understanding the language is our willingness to be patient with the communication and our willingness to understand culture and some of those habits, as opposed to simply being able to explain ourselves. We need to be able to have two-way conversation, and sometimes it's a little bit more than just knowing vocabulary. One of the key aspects in figuring out if we're both able to communicate properly is if they are willing to be super patient with me as I use my broken Spanish as well as Google Translate to communicate. And two, I need to be patient and understand that there's a huge communication barrier. And so my expectation sometimes needs to be checked, because there's kind of a lot of barriers between myself and perhaps a local housekeeper. Here, if I say something like, I want you to clean my kitchen and my bathroom and my laundry, they might interpret it as I don't want you to touch anything else, which is not the case. I would love for you to clean the entire house, to include the baseboards if we've got time, but I just have my priorities, and these are the things I want you to focus on first. I would be really frustrated if you came and focused on the things that didn't matter to me first, and it took forever for you to get to the things that actually mattered to me. Because also, I don't want you in my house all day. So it does tie along a little bit with finding the person that you vibe with, finding the person that makes you feel that warm fuzzy, like you can trust them, but being able to trust them specifically on understanding you, and not just understanding you, but again, being willing to work with you so that the two of you can kind of train each other on how best to communicate. So just remember that when it comes to good communication, it's a two-way street. You can't have just one person communicating well and the other person not. So there is responsibility on both parties, and it's not just about whether you know English or whether you know Spanish, although obviously the ownership I think is on us as the people hiring to learn Spanish. In addition to the language barrier, there's also a culture barrier, and sometimes that's the one that can be a little more tricky. And so I strongly recommend, especially if you don't know this person very well, that you work the relationship slowly, right? Perhaps start on a temporary basis. I just need somebody to clean my house this one time. That way you can get to know them, get the good vibes, and test out your communication skills. It might be that today your intention is to ask them, hey, can you clean the baseboards, for example? But maybe you keep pointing to the floor and they're like, of course we're gonna clean the floors. That's what we always do. And you realize, okay, I'm clearly not getting my message across. It's okay if that day you go, listen, I'm not 100% how to continue, so I'm gonna let them do what they do, and then by next week when they come back, I will have either learned the word for baseboards so they fully understand what I'm talking about, or I will make an attempt to figure out more if it's customary for housekeepers to do that, or maybe it's considered an upcharge, right? So there's kind of ownership on both sides to take the relationship slowly. We don't want to go from day one expecting perfection out of our housekeepers. Although generally, if you hire the right way, I think you'll be more pleased with the outcome than not. But again, anytime we're talking about two people building a working relationship, this does take time. So how do you find a housekeeper? There are agencies in a lot of places, especially larger places that have larger expat communities. I tend not to trust agencies that will hire housekeepers or other services for you. There are very few exceptions, and really the number one reason is because they're getting a cut. And I'm not always sure if they're getting just enough for their service, as well as making sure that they get paid, disability and severance and all of that jazz, which is what a lot of these companies do say that they handle, or if the worker is just getting gypped. So I lean paying the housekeeper directly as opposed to using an agent to find/pay the housekeeper. This is actually pretty controversial, but yeah, it's what I do. Now that being said, I'm coming from the viewpoint of a retiree, somebody that's living overseas and not really earning an income from Mexico. However, if you own a business in Mexico, or if you work for the government in Mexico, you're going to want to hire a housekeeper through a service. That way all of your taxes and legalities are met. So when I say hiring directly, I am speaking about, for lack of a better term, the everyday man. And so how would the everyday man, the everyday person, how do I find my housekeepers? And number one is word of mouth. Word of mouth does not necessarily mean go onto Facebook and say, hey, looking for a part-time housekeeper, who do you recommend? It's right up there with going on Facebook and saying, hey, I'm looking for a house for 20,000 pesos a month, what do you recommend? You're going to get recommendations, and they might not be the best quality for you. So in Merida, I actually waited a full year before hiring my housekeeper, because at least for myself, understanding the culture takes a lot of time. There wasn't a lot of YouTubers giving me hints on how I can do this effectively, and so I just had a lot of questions that I didn't know. But when I finally did decide to hire a housekeeper, of course, I went to a trusted local friend to ask her if she had any references, and because I only needed the housekeeper one day a week, She was like, I have a housekeeper. She's got some free time. Let me ask her if she wants to do this. And so in Merida, while I didn't know my housekeeper when I first met her, I was really comfortable going immediately to a weekly relationship because I really trusted my friend who I met 2 days after arriving in Merida. And so she understood my needs really well. I understood what she considered to be a good person really well. And so within moments of meeting my new housekeeper, I knew this was a keeper. I'm not gonna have any problems at all. Now here in San Cruz, one, I haven't been here quite as long as I was in Merida at the time, but I'm now in my 5th month. And so when I decided, yep, it's time to get a housekeeper, I actually chose the woman that I also met on my first day of arriving at this Airbnb, who is my Airbnb manager. She is somebody that my Airbnb host, now landlord, trusts to take care of all of her properties and to clean up after every Airbnb guest leaves. She was in fact the lady that opened the door for me, gave me the keys, gave me all the instructions, the details, the things that I'm gonna need while here. She was also the lady that when I got sick, I WhatsApped her and I asked her who she recommended as a doctor. And so while she hasn't been my housekeeper the whole time, and while I certainly can't say that we are close friends, she's definitely somebody that I've already been trusting for the last 4.5 months. And so kind of upping our relationship was pretty easy. But let's say your experience is not the same, okay? Let's say that you don't necessarily have somebody you trust, but you really need somebody to come to your house and you want to hopefully build a pretty good relationship kind of quickly. I recommend first word of mouth, and then second, hiring slowly. Meaning, instead of telling the person that you want somebody to come once a week, I would recommend saying, hey, I just need a one-time cleanup of my house. How much do you charge, etc. And then when they come, that's your opportunity to get to know them, to talk with them, ask them various questions to give you that warm fuzzy that they understand you and that they're willing to work with you if you have other needs. Now, it is a risk. It could be that this person really does not have time every week, but that they had this one-time opportunity to help you, and that's fine. Perhaps this would be a great person to recommend somebody else. Now, something I hated doing in the US with my part-time housekeepers is I hated being there while they cleaned. I felt like I was awful. I didn't want to see them seeing my mess. And because I worked away from home, I didn't want to come home and just like plop on the sofa and watch TV while they cleaned my house. That seemed exceptionally rude. And so what I did is anytime I came home early, I basically told them, hey, thank you so much. That's all I need for today. I'll see you next week or the next time, which is again, another reason why it was super important that I knew my priorities when it came to their cleaning my house, because if I came home early and all they had done is swept the floor, I would have been pretty irate. But because they knew the things that really mattered to me, those were the things they worked on first. And so even if I came home, they might not be done with some of the things I don't care about, but they were definitely done with the things I do care about, and that matters. But something I would actually highly recommend for building that housekeeper relationship when you first hire someone is to actually be in the house while they clean. I know this is kind of weird, and I do recommend having an activity of some sort so that it doesn't look like you're just being a lazy bum while somebody's cleaning your house. For myself, I'm often editing my YouTube videos or my customers' YouTube videos to keep busy because one, that is my job. Part of the reason why I don't want to be kicked out of my house for so long is because I probably have something I need to be doing, and it's best that I do it at home. So in Merida as well as here, I'm always home when they're cleaning, and the great thing about this is it allows me to, in between my work moments, in between their work moments, have time to connect, have time to ask questions and get to know them on a personal level, and again, just make more and more connection points, more and more touch points on understanding each other a little bit better. And what I find is, on the one hand, while I'm trying to figure out how to explain something that I like or how to explain something that I need, they're doing the same thing. The beauty of these housekeepers is most of them know the different options when it comes to cleaning your home. And so I find that they're actually asking me a lot of questions like, do you want me to change your sheets? Where do you keep your clean sheets? Do you have this kind of cleaning product? Where do you keep them? Because I might forget to mention certain things because I'm translating in a different language, and so things get missed. And by the way, that's another positive touch point, is when the housekeeper is doing their best to let me know their concerns about the house so that she's taking care of my home the way I want her to. And on my end, we're getting to know each other that much more. So I love when housekeepers ask me questions, and if I wasn't there, that relationship wouldn't be built quite as much, and so they might be much more timid about asking me questions. They might think that it's rude, but because I'm there, and because I think I give the appearance of I don't understand Spanish, and so I'm just as lost as you are, I think it gives them the vibe vibe of, okay, I think she's approachable enough to ask, hey, where do you normally keep this? Is it okay if I use this rag to clean this item? Or do you have a preference on what tools I use? I think you'll bond much faster with your housekeeper if you are actually home while they're cleaning. I totally recommend having some kind of activity of some sort, but one that allows you to take breaks so you can chit chat with your housekeeper. Okay, so let's talk a little bit on the legality side of the house as well as some of the customs. I do want to reiterate, for those of you who don't know me very well, I am not in any way, shape, or form a lawyer. I do not consider myself to be a Mexico expert, and so just know it's always a good idea to do your own research when it comes to this. But here is the gist, here is the generally accepted customs. Feel free, by the way, if you know any more details or specifics, let me know in the comments. I'm always loving learning more about this topic. Okay, so most housekeepers fall under what's called the informal economy, aka you're paying them under the table. This is really common not just for housekeepers, but for a lot of services that you might be using. There are a lot of pop-up restaurants that are not formal. There are chefs, there are bakers, there are seamstresses. Like, there's just a lot of jobs where it's not necessarily reported anywhere. And so a lot of the concerns you can have in the US when it comes to paying somebody under the table really do apply here. So let's talk about that. In the US, when you have a restaurant and you're paying somebody under the table, maybe it's your cousin, maybe it's your child, whatever, there's kind of two stories, right? There's the one story of you're getting extra help, they're getting extra cash, win-win for all, and everything is good. And I think that's generally the concept here in Mexico, is kind of this positive, I've got time, you need a service, let me help you out, and you pay me cash for that. And so one of the reasons why it's considered illegal in the US, especially to, as a business, hire somebody for cash, to hire somebody under the table, is because we have a lot of oversight and concern about, are you taking care of this employee correctly? If you're paying them under the table, you're probably not paying for insurance, medical, you're probably not paying for days off. There's no contract, and therefore you can fire them on a whim. You can decide to pay less on a whim. The same concerns actually do apply here in Mexico, even though hiring through the informal economy is considered normal, is considered natural. It is also still a concern that you're not going to treat your employee correctly. And so how can you be a responsible employer without a contract? So rule number one is always treating everybody like they're a real person. And so even if you maybe don't have the best relationship with your housekeeper or anyone, you should always treat them with dignity and respect. And if it's something you can't do, then you really shouldn't have them as an employee. Next is to never hire a teenager. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to ask for identification, but there are child labor laws here in Mexico, and I think the safest bet is to not hire teenagers. All the teenagers around the world might be right now like, what? We need jobs too. I get it. But especially when you're adding the lack of communication skills, I just think the risk is huge in making a mistake, and I would much rather work with an adult who hopefully can stand up for themselves than a child who might just do whatever you tell them to do because they're used to taking orders from adults. I think, yeah, the safest bet is I would not hire a teenager unless their parents are also going to be coming with you, which, by the way, if you have a very large location, might not be a horrible idea. Third is to follow through on your word. So if you tell somebody that you're going to hire them every week to clean your home, every week be prepared to pay that person whether you let them in your home or not. Meaning if you decide to take a week vacation to Palenque and you're not going to be home and you don't need a housekeeper that day, that's fine. You still need to pay the person because you told them that you were going to hire them for a weekly service. It means that they've etched out time for you every week, perhaps turning down other jobs. So do the right thing and make sure you pay them. On a similar note, number 4 would be let them know if you are transient. If you're only planning on staying in the area for a month or 2 months, let them know that this is not a permanent job and that they're eventually going to have to find something else to do with that time. Give time off for holidays / pay them appropriately if you really need them to work on holiday. Now, technically speaking, Mexico has 8 federally recognized holidays. Dia de los Muertos is actually not one of them. Like, I'm shocked. Anyway, there are 8 federal holidays that these workers are not expected to work. Anyone working on one of these 8 holidays gets paid triple the amount. So whatever they normally get paid, one, they're supposed to have the option to have that day off, but if they choose to work, you as an employer are supposed to pay triple the amount. Now, when I say give them the day off, I do mean it is a paid day off. So again, this is a situation where you're gonna pay them for that day, but you're gonna let them have the time off. If for some reason you really need them to come in and they're willing to do it, make sure they understand it's fully voluntary, then you would pay triple the amount. But either way, you're still paying for that day, whether they work or not. Now, that being said, let's say you only have a housekeeper every Wednesday and there just aren't any holidays that fall on a Wednesday, then you're good. You don't have to worry about it. Now, if you're just hiring for the short term, these things really don't apply. and it's kind of a gray area what short-term might be considered. But just know that on December 20th, it is customary to give a long-term worker a Christmas pay. It is not considered a Christmas bonus. Really, the difference is that a bonus would be voluntary. So it is actually a law that workers get this Christmas pay called a aguinaldo every year on or before December 20th. And there's a full mathematical calculation that you would do, and it is 15 days worth of pay. Now, if they only work for you once a week or twice a week, you do have to figure out what the daily rate is. Essentially, if they work for you once a week, then you divide however much you pay that once a week by 7, and that's their daily rate. And then you would multiply that by 15. That's the easy math. However, if they've not worked for you for an entire year, then you would only pay a portion of that. So the 15 days of pay is essentially earned through 365 days of work. So if they've only worked for you for 1 week, 1 month, 2 months, then you would just divide it, right? So if they work for you half the year, then instead of getting 15 days, they would get 7.5 days of pay, etc. And also every year, it is accepted that you would give a yearly pay, and this is 12 days per year that they've worked for you. For example, we calculated the daily rate of your weekly employee. So at their 1-year anniversary, you would take that number, multiply by 12, and that's how much you would pay. The second year, you would multiply that number by 24, and that's how much they get. In the third year by 36, and so on and so forth. I hope that makes sense. Again, this is considered mandatory. This is not considered a bonus or a great job done. It's you've been working here for a year, and this is something that you are due. Paid vacation is kind of confusing when it comes to a housekeeper employee type relationship, but generally for a full-time employee, in 1 year they are expected to get 6 days of paid leave. This is in addition to the paid federal holidays. Got it? So they get 8 days for the holidays, but they get an additional 6 days of paid vacation for the first year. It obviously increases every year that they work for you. Again, I'm not exactly sure how I would play that in terms of a housekeeper, but essentially, if they want to take some days off, I would let them, and within reason, I would pay for those days off. And last but not least is pay severance. So at this point, I'm going to remind you that I am, again, not a lawyer. I am not an expert on this. And lawyers here actually are pretty reasonable. And so the longer you've hired this person, the more likely I think it might be a good idea to talk to a lawyer and just see what your rights are. Obviously, laws are also always changing, and so I think it's worth getting a lawyer if you have concerns about firing somebody. But I will say this, at the end of the day, if you're paying somebody under the table on the informal economy, people can still sue you for not following through on what is expected. So you do want to tread carefully. Again, hire slowly and make sure that you've got a good relationship with this person, especially the longer the relationship is going. If you have any qualms about this person, you don't trust them, fire quickly. But severance pay in Mexico is 3 times the monthly pay, plus other bonuses depending on how long they've worked for you. So just know it's serious. Again, having a good relationship, letting people know that you are transient, and so it's not expected that you're going to pay them forever and ever. From a legal point of view, I'm pretty confident that a lawyer will tell you having it in writing is the smartest thing to do. In a he said, she said fight, I cannot guarantee who would win in this location, but if you have a good relationship with your housekeeper, if you appreciate your housekeeper, I think that it's relatively easy to do the right thing, to pay them appropriately, and of course, to always treat them with dignity and respect. All right, I hope that answered all of your questions when it comes to hiring a housekeeper, how to do it, and some of the do's and don'ts. Let me know in the comments below if I missed anything, and I'll try to make sure to find that answer for you. Or if you know what I missed, please let me know. I'm always happy to learn.